Hello music fans, I'm back here with my cat Monty, and this is another episode of What's New 2023 where I talk about new albums that came out recently. And I think I'm going to talk about 7 new albums that came out. These all came out in January 2023. Some of them are older than a week old though, and I just kind of missed them, but I wanted to get around back to them and talk about them. I also wanted to make a correction, thanks to Decibel École de Musique for commenting on one of my videos where I talked about Wedingoth, a band, and pointing out a mistake. I accidentally listened to the wrong Wedingoth album. I listened to I must have listened to their first album instead of their most recent one. So I'm going to start off by giving my first impressions of their most recent one because I corrected that mistake. So their album that came out January 10th is called 5 Stars Above. It's kind of progressive Gothic metal. It's got some symphonic influences, female vocals, and my favorite songs on it are My Own Sacrifice and I Don't Care. It's their 4th album, and unlike the debut album featured more occasional male vocals that were harsher, but those aren't as prevalent on this new one. This ended up being better than I expected. They're a lesser known, kind of lower budget, lower production value band, but they still sound pretty decent. The guitar playing's great. On their very first album, I liked kind of the heavier tracks called From Hell and Twilight. Like I said, on 5 Stars Above, I liked My Own Sacrifice and I Don't Care. The main riff of I Don't Care really reminded me of Tool's Schism. So that's Wedingoth. And now back to our regular programming. I want to talk about a release from January 20th by a band called Twilight Force, and it's called At the Heart of Wintervale, and this is symphonic power metal. My favorite song on here would be The Last Crystal Bearer, which is the 10-minute album closer. It has a lot of symphonic elements reminiscent of Symphony X. This is this band's 4th album. If you're a fan of bands like Dragon Force, Hammerfall, and Blind Guardian, you'll like this. There's epic, soaring vocals with fantasy-based lyrics, intense guitar solos with some neoclassical flair. A little bit cheesy, but it's fun. I'd say they picked up the power metal torch from Dragon Force because I like this album even better than the last Dragon Force album. I'm not usually the biggest power metal fan, but this is probably my 2nd favorite power metal album of the decade so far, after Sacred Oath's Return of the Dragon from 2021. Mind you, I've probably only listened to about 20 power metal albums this decade so far, so I'm not necessarily an expert in that genre. Next, I'm going to talk about a release from January 6th by a band called Frostbitt. And the album's called Machine Destroy. This is progressive metal, kind of that Djent style. And check out the title track if you're wanting a preview track. It's their 4th album. They're a Norwegian band, and if you're a fan of bands like Meshuggah and Car Bomb, you'll like this. And another one that I haven't mentioned yet on my channel that I checked out is Thy Darkened Shade with their album Liber Lvcifer 2 Mahapralaya. It came out on January 10th. This is black metal with some progressive influences. It's the 3rd album by this Greek band, and I typically find satanic black metal music a bit corny. This is one that has some of those vibes, but the music is also pretty epic and a little bit progressive, so it was a fun listen even if I won't return to it much. And there was a release that I missed that came out right on New Year's Day, January 1st. A band called Mechina released Cenotaph. This is also progressive metal of the Djent style, but it's got some symphonic metal and some death metal influences in there. It's the 11th album from this American band. They've got male and female vocals. I believe it's all programmed drums. It was an interesting listen, but again, I won't go back to it too much. I'd prefer it if they had some real instruments there. And an album that just came out on January 27th by Uriah Heep. That'll be the next one I'm going to talk about. It's called Chaos and Color. This is hard rock with progressive rock and heavy metal influences. It's the 25th album by this English band. They've been going for a long time. I listened to this out of respect for their long career. I didn't really have high expectations that these old folks would make anything groundbreaking, but I thought maybe they'd surprise me. It did end up being better than I expected. There's nothing extraordinary here, but it's still really solid hard rock. My favorite song here on first listen was You'll Never Be Alone. It had some kind of proggy moments, but most of it's kind of catchy and accessible hard rock, bordering on heavy metal sometimes. A little bit, it reminded me a little bit of Iron Maiden. And the last album that I'm going to talk about today also just came out recently on January 27th is Steve Vai with Vai/Gash. And this is hard rock with heavy metal and pop influences. This was actually recorded a while back, I think in 1991, but just released this year. It was shelved. It was Vai's straight ahead rock album that he did with the vocalist Johnny Gash Sombretto. He shelved the project after Gash died in a bike accident in 1998. At the time of recording this, Vai was fresh off stints in David Lee Roth's solo band and Whitesnake, and he viewed the Vai Gash project as a logical extension of those endeavors. This is very well executed and catchy rock music, but there's nothing too innovative or interesting here. The music sounds like AC/DC, kind of with the vocals sounding like maybe Bryan Adams. The vocals don't really sound like AC/DC, but the guitars and everything do. Yeah, the vocals are kind of like catchy, mainstream rock sounding, well executed. Bryan Adams came to mind, so I mentioned his name. So I probably won't go back to it too much. I would prefer to hear Steve Vai working on more progressive guitar-based music. That's it for my first impressions on some albums that came out in January 2023. Hope something on this list sounded interesting to you and you check it out and enjoy. Until next time, peace out.